Thank you, choir. It ties in a little bit with the beginning of my sermon this morning, remembrance. Several years ago on the radio, actually, I heard a sports commentator talk about golf stories. One in particular that occurred several years ago at the famous Masters golf tournament. The character of athletes recently has been on the front pages of our papers, and that's, I guess, why one of the commentators on the radio chose to talk about this particular event. The role model image of some of the athletes has been shot full of holes, and I imagine that there are athletes out there that haven't been named yet that might fit in this category. The commentator goes on to say that he had read a book entitled Golfers' Events, which is part of unfolding a comparison story which took place at the Masters a few years ago. This was about several of the top golfers who were in the top 10. Some of them had moral disintegrations. Even one had financial problems, which is hard to believe. Now, as soon as a golfer hit a drive or made a putt, the cameras switched back to them to see what they were doing. How were they doing? Were they holding up? There they were, missing a putt, which would have moved them closer into contention. They were also hooking a drive to demonstrate how their distraction, time, had hurt their game. They looked dejected and somber, and they attempted to regain their past glory by doing a little bit better. And there were the nonstop comments by the announcers regarding their efforts to put their transgressions behind them and concentrate on the job at hand. It just kept going on, as it usually did during their transgression. But today, this was even more so. Now, at the same time, on a different part of the golf course, a kind of miracle was taking place. There was another renowned golfer who just kept smiling. He smiled when he hit a good shot, and he smiled when he hit a bad shot. He smiled when he made a 50-foot putt, and even smiled when he missed a 5-foot putt. As he walked from hole to hole, he smiled to acknowledge the welcome of the crowd which greeted him on every hole. And sometimes he shook hands with a few of them. He never cursed a bad shot or came up with excuses for a miss. All he did was play and smile. Now, why would Phil Mickelson be smiling? Here was a man who was as competitive as the next guy and who wanted to win just as much as anyone on the tournament. Here was a man who hit some great shots and some lousy ones, obviously lessening his chances for success. Additionally, here was a man whose life and his wife had been fallen because of his wife having had breast cancer. And his mother had breast cancer. Here was a man who, rather than allow them to fight their health battles alone, took time off from the PGA Tour, the tour which provided his livelihood. He wanted to be with them. Now, here was a man who returned to the game he loved only when his wife insisted that he do so. Here was a man who was so glad that his wife's physical improvements, as she moved closer to being cured, that he rewarded her oncologist by asking him to be his caddy and thereby come as close to the action that was possible while walking the incredibly fairways of Augusta. Now, such a move could have cost Mickelson a pile of money, as he lost the advice of someone who knew the game and knew the course. But this was his gift to someone he could never repay enough for what he had done. During the last round of the final day, Phil's wife was staying in their hotel room because she was still weak from the chemo treatments she had been receiving. As his score showed, he was in contention to win. So she decided she should be there. Phil did not know as he walked up to the 18th green that she would be there to watch him. Phil continued to smile. He smiled at the crowd. He smiled at the TV audience. He smiled at the officials. And maybe he even smiled to God. After his last winning putt that found the cup, he hugged his physician caddy, shook hands with the others on the green. Then he walked to the scorer's tent, displaying his best and brightest smile of all. He saw his wife in the midst of the thousands who were cheering for him, and it seemed as if they were the only two that were there. They hugged, and as their tears and smiles mingled, it was obvious that their most important victory had nothing to do with golf. Comparing Phil to some of the wayward, one cannot help but make a few comparisons, said the commentator. All are great golfers, and the stumbling ones may prove to be the best yet, ever, if and when they can get physically and mentally cured. Many have endured some difficult times and some traumatic experiences, but mostly it was because of their own making. While Phil, on the other hand, graciously and bravely played the hands which were dealt to him. Mickelson had continued to smile through his pain and approached the world with a grateful heart and a positive attitude. Character. That's what we're talking about today. Character. That's what today's scripture reading is about. The Bible is filled with advice presented in various ways. There are allegories which observe human beings in action while trying to understand and explain what makes us what we are. There are illustrations of how we should and how we shouldn't behave if we are serious about living good and productive lives, in keeping with what we perceive to be the will and the way of Christ. There are parables which tell stories to prove points regarding things like justice and righteousness, like love and compassion. There are proverbs and commandments which tell us what we should do and what we shouldn't do. All of them combined offer a composite of what it means to be a fully, completely human as possible. Fully human completely to the extent that we reflect the divinity which is within us through our thoughts and our deeds. Now, the passage from Matthew tells us once again how we should treat others, because how we treat ourselves reveals the extent of our commitment to God. The world is full of folks who just love the Bible. Many of them have read it from cover to cover and even memorized long passages. And some of them try to follow his teachings. But all too often the Bible is used as a bludgeon to beat down those with whom we disagree. And just about anything can be biblically supported and authenticated, especially if we pull a few sayings out of context. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. Does the way we live reflect how much we love the Bible and how much we understand the Bible and how much we respect the Bible? Expressed another way, in our real faith demonstrated by our words or by our deeds. Norman Vincent Peale tells a story of a time that he was a young minister in Syracuse, New York. There was a student named Bill and he presents a strange appearance. His hair was long and wild. He wore a holy t-shirt. His jeans had seen better and cleaner days, and he was barefooted. This pretty much represents what he looked like throughout his 4 years of college. But he's a brilliant and profound student, very bright and very deep, who had become attracted to Christianity and who could now be characterized as a seeker and searcher after religious understanding. Across the street from the college campus was Dr. Peel's Methodist Church, which was striving to develop a ministry throughout the students at the university. But the members and leadership at the church were just not sure how to go about it. But one day, free-spirited Bill, well, he attended a worship service there. When he arrived at the service, it was already started. So he starts down the center aisle looking for a seat. Well, the church was packed. Maybe it was Easter or maybe it was Christmas. And it doesn't take long for the folks to start feeling a bit uncomfortable. However, they're polite and they say nothing. Bill gets closer and closer and closer to the pulpit until, realizing that there's no room readily available in the pews and no one is going to go out of his or her way to make such room, he sits down in the center aisle, and now folks are getting ready to be upset. The tension's in the air. It's so thick that you could cut it with a butter knife. Even Dr. Peel is at a loss regarding what to do. But he notices that one of the congregation's most respected members, a man in his 80s, who has been around forever and served in most of the leadership capacities at the church, is coming from the narthex, and he's approaching Bill. The man is tall, he's slim, dignified, silver gray hair, wearing a three-piece suit. He just oozes with elegance and courtliness. Now he's walking with the aid of a cane. He gets near to Bill, and his fellow parishioners speculate on what is he going to do. Finally, the man reaches Bill. He drops his cane on the floor. Then, with considerable difficulty, he lowers himself so that he can sit beside Bill, and they can worship together. He believes that nobody should come to church and be alone. At this point, there are very few dry eyes in the house. They look at each other, and not saying a word, they just smile. Now the sermon can begin. After he gains control of himself, Dr. Peel says, "What I'm about to preach, you will never remember, but what you have just witnessed, you will never forget. Be careful how you live. You may be the only Bible that some people will ever read." Now, my friends, I'm going to smile. I'm going to smile if the weather's nice or if the weather's bad. I'm going to smile, and this will take some effort, at a driver who goes too slow or goes too fast, the driver who honks his horn on me or cuts me off. I'm going to smile if all is going well or all is not going well. And if some person in front of me checks out more than the 10 limit items at the grocery store, or a driver takes my parking space that I've waited for, and when the day is done, I'm going to save my biggest smile for the person who makes me and my life as complete as it can be. Then I'm going to figuratively look to the heavens and give thanks for being able to smile, You see, I too would like to become a living Bible, like the elderly man in the church who sat on the floor and with Bill because few people wouldn't give enough room for him to sit with them. Or like Phil Mickelson, as he realized what is really important in life and greeted his wife with a hug and a kiss. How about you? Which one are you?